"This baby isn't yours." The words hit the billionaire Lucas Grant like a verdict in the quiet hospital corridor. Elena Ramirez's voice barely rose above a whisper, yet it echoed through him, sharp, final, cold, with something he couldn't name. In her trembling hands, a hospital envelope, sealed, heavy, dangerous, the kind that changes lives with a single piece of paper. Lucas stared at her, searching for guilt. She met his gaze with calm defiance. Around them, the city kept moving, but inside that sterile white hallway, time froze. The envelope slipped from her fingers, and everything he thought he knew began to unravel. Elena Ramirez had grown up in the quiet edges of other people's wealth. Her mother, Isabel, had worked as a maid for the Grant family for over 20 years, polishing silver cutlery worth more than their entire apartment in Queens. From the age of 6, Elena had learned what silence meant in rich houses. You speak only when spoken to, and you never look too long at things you can't afford. But Elena had also learned something her mother never dared to teach out loud. Dignity doesn't need money to exist. She carried that belief like a shield through every double shift, every condescending glance, every errand where she was the maid's girl. It was what kept her standing when others bowed. By 24, she had earned a degree in business administration from City College, paid for by 3 jobs, and a heart that refused to bend. She never used her family connection to the Grants to open doors. She wanted to earn her own key. Still, life had a way of pushing her back toward that marble world. When Isabel's health began to fail, the maid's wages barely covered the prescriptions. And so, reluctantly, Elena stepped into the one place she had sworn never to depend on, the Grant household. She took on her mother's duties temporarily, quietly, efficiently, until she caught the attention of Lucas Grant, the billionaire son now running the empire his father left behind. He saw her precision, her calm, her refusal to flatter. And that was the beginning of everything, because in houses built on power, even a glance can turn into gossip, and in a city like New York, one whisper can destroy more than a reputation. It can change a life. It started with a phone call that didn't sound real. "Miss Ramirez," the voice said, crisp and polite, "Mr. Grant's office is offering you a temporary position at Grant Industries, executive assistant level. 2 months, possibly longer." Elena almost dropped the phone. Grant Industries, the very name that loomed like a skyline over her childhood. She had dusted the books in that mansion, polished its trophies, and now she was being asked to sit behind one of its desks. For once, it felt like the world was tilting in her favor. She told herself it was just business, a short-term role, a stepping stone, nothing more. But the first morning she walked into that glass tower in Midtown, something inside her shifted. The air smelled of wealth, leather, perfume, and ambition. Her reflection in the polished elevator doors looked out of place, but her eyes held steady. Lucas Grant barely looked at her during their introduction. He was all precision, pressed suit, clipped tone, a man used to being obeyed. Yet there was a flicker of curiosity when he noticed her last name. "Ramirez," he said. "Any relation to Isabel?" "Yes," she answered simply. "She's my mother." Something unreadable passed over his face. Not disdain, not warmth, just calculation. "She's worked for us a long time. I trust she taught you discipline." "She taught me how to stand," Elena replied. It wasn't meant as defiance, but the words lingered between them, heavier than they should have been. Days turned into weeks. She became indispensable, efficient, calm under pressure. He began to notice her presence, not her position, and then came the invitation, the company's annual charity gala. Her first night, stepping into the same world she'd only ever cleaned from the outside. Night that would rewrite everything she thought she knew. The Grant Foundation Gala was a blur of glass chandeliers, whispered alliances, and champagne that tasted like wealth itself. Elena had borrowed a plain navy dress. Simple, elegant, nothing that screamed for attention. She stayed close to the catering table, clutching a small clutch bag as though it were armor. It should have been her proudest night. Proof that she could stand in any room and hold her own. But the whispers began before dessert was served. Isn't that Isabel's daughter? The maid's girl? I heard she's pregnant. Elena's hand went cold around her glass. The laughter was low, but sharp enough to slice through the string quartet's melody. She turned and saw faces pretending not to look, eyes flicking toward her midsection, toward the table where Lucas Grant stood. Then someone murmured louder, "They say it's his." The room shifted. The hum of polite conversation turned brittle. 100 subtle judgments hung in the air, cruel, invisible, merciless. Eleanor's pulse thudded in her ears. Her instinct screamed to leave, but she stood frozen as if movement would confirm their lie. Across the hall, Lucas noticed. His expression darkened as he caught fragments of conversation. By the time he reached her, a red-faced board member's wife was smirking, whispering to her companion, "Well, money attracts all kinds of ambition." Lucas's voice cut through the noise. "What's going on here?" The woman feigned surprise. "Oh, nothing, dear. Just talk of office. Relationships." His eyes shifted to Elena, questioning, cold, searching for truth. The silence between them stretched painfully. Finally, Eleanor found her voice, low but steady. "It's not true. None of it. Then why are people saying it?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. She could feel the room watching, every pair of eyes waiting for her to crack, to cry, to confess. Her dignity burned hotter than her humiliation. "Because they need a story," she said. "And I'm the easiest one to believe." But it was too late. The seed was planted, and in that polished hall of mirrors, rumour had already become fact. By the end of the night, the invitations for next week's board meeting were already circulating, and her name was on the agenda. Not as an assistant, but as a scandal. Lucas Grant had been raised in boardrooms, not living rooms. He understood negotiation, strategy, and the subtle art of silence, but not shame. That night, as the guests drifted home in their town cars, the echoes of those whispers refused to fade. He had seen the look in Elena's eyes, the quiet composure of someone swallowing humiliation too deep to show. It wasn't guilt. It was something else, something that didn't fit the picture the gossip had painted. At his office the next morning, the tabloids were already waiting on his desk. Billionaire heir and the maid's daughter, secret affair. His mother, Margaret Grant, had sent a single text, "Fix it quietly." He read it twice before deleting it. For years, Lucas had followed the same rules his father taught him. Control the narrative. Never explain yourself and never ever let emotion dictate a decision. But now, emotion was the one thing he couldn't ignore, because he couldn't stop replaying the image of Elena standing there in that navy dress. A woman outnumbered by rumors, yet somehow unbroken. He remembered her saying, "Because they need a story." And he wondered for the first time if he'd been complicit in letting people like her always become the story, the easy scapegoat for the powerful. Still, doubt crept in. What if there was truth beneath the talk? What if he'd made a mistake by hiring her, by trusting her? Lucas ordered an internal review. Quietly, discreetly, but every report came back the same. Flawless work, impeccable record, 0 red flags. Then, as if the universe wanted to test his restraint, a brown envelope arrived at his desk. No sender name, no message, just a single ultrasound photo and a note that read, "She's hiding more than you think." That was the moment something shifted inside him. Not anger, not suspicion, but a relentless need to know. He could endure public scandal. He could handle corporate wars. But being lied to, being used, that was the one thing Lucas Grant couldn't forgive. And if Elena Ramirez wasn't telling the full truth, he intended to find out, no matter what it exposed. 3 days after the gala, the whispers had reached every corner of Grant Industries. Assistants went quiet when Elena passed. Executives avoided eye contact. Even the janitors, the ones who used to greet her kindly, looked away. That morning she stood outside the glass conference room where the weekly board meeting was underway. She wasn't supposed to be there, but her name had been printed on the agenda in bold, Elena Ramirez, Disciplinary Review. Inside, a half-circle of senior partners waited like judges. Margaret Grant sat at the head, immaculate in pearls and steel poise. Lucas was beside her, silent, unreadable. "Elena Ramirez," Margaret began, voice smooth as marble. "You've brought unnecessary attention to this company. It would be best if you submitted your resignation today." The room murmured in approval. Elena's pulse hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "I did nothing wrong. I won't resign for something I didn't do." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You expect us to believe this? Situation is pure coincidence?" Before Elena could answer, Lucas rose. The scrape of his chair cut through the silence. Enough. Every head turned toward him. He rarely raised his voice, but the quiet authority in that single word commanded the room. "She will not resign," he said flatly. "Until there's proof of wrongdoing, this discussion ends here." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Lucas," he didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on Elena. "If you want proof," he said, his tone tightening, "we'll get it." A DNA test. The air thickened with shock. Elena's hands trembled, but she met his stare. "Fine," she whispered. "Let the truth speak." The meeting ended abruptly, but the story had just begun, because in that room full of power, he had chosen to stand beside her, not above her. The confrontation came that evening, in the Grant penthouse overlooking the Hudson. The city below sparkled, indifferent to the storm inside. Margaret Grant stood by the window, a glass of scotch in her hand, her posture unyielding. Lucas entered without knocking. He didn't need to. This argument had been building since the board meeting. "You embarrassed the family," she said, her voice controlled but sharp. "Defending her, a maid's daughter, in front of partners and investors? Do you have any idea how that looks?" Lucas exhaled slowly. "It looks like fairness. Something this company could use more of. Fairness." She turned, eyes narrowing. "You think fairness builds empires?" "No, Lucas, control does." "Appearances do. The Grants don't beg for sympathy. We dictate the narrative." He stepped closer, jaw tightening. "And what if your narrative destroys someone innocent? What then? Do we write that off as a cost of power?" "She is not innocent," Margaret snapped. "She's playing you. The rumors, the timing, all too convenient. You're letting guilt cloud your judgment. Maybe guilt is overdue," he said quietly. "You taught me to see people as assets or liabilities, but what if I'm tired of measuring humanity by balance sheets?" The silence that followed was razor-sharp. Margaret's tone softened, but her words did not. "You think protecting her makes you noble? It makes you naive. That girl will never be one of us, no matter how you polish her image." Lucas met her eyes, calm, steady. "Maybe that's exactly why I trust her." He left the room before she could answer. The echo of his footsteps fading down the marble hall. For the first time, Margaret Grant felt something colder than anger, the sense that her son's loyalty had shifted, and it wasn't toward her anymore. The following week was a blur of tension and silence. The DNA test had been sent to a private lab, and the waiting felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Elena kept her head down, working through the hours as if normalcy could drown the noise. But everywhere she went, eyes followed her, pity from some, mockery from others. She'd thought she'd grown used to judgment, but this time it cut deeper. That afternoon, as she left the office, Lucas was waiting by the elevator. His expression was unreadable, his tone low. "Come with me." He led her to the rooftop terrace, a private space rarely used except by him. The city stretched wide beneath them, orange light pooling across the skyline. Elena folded her arms. "If this is about the test, I've already told the truth." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been quiet. I thought you'd be angry." "I am," she said softly. "Just not the kind of angry that screams." The wind caught her hair, pulling strands across her face. She didn't move to fix them. "You don't have to pretend to believe me, Mr. Grant. You wanted proof. You'll get it. Until then, I'll survive like I always have." Lucas's voice softened. "You think this is easy for me?" "No," she replied. "I think it's easier for you than for me. You get to question me from a tower I'll never reach." Her words hit him harder than she meant them to. He took a slow breath. "You think I wanted this rumor? This chaos? You think I don't see what it's done to you?" She met his gaze, steady now. "Then why did you stand by and let it happen until it reached your doorstep?" He didn't answer. Because she was right, Elena turned away, gripping the railing. "I used to believe people like you didn't see people like me. Now I know worse. You do see us, you just don't think we matter." Something in his chest twisted. "Elena," he said quietly, "when that test comes back and the truth clears your name, I'll make it right." She shook her head. "You can't make right what was never fair." And she walked away, leaving him alone on the rooftop, a man surrounded by power, realizing for the first time how powerless he felt. The week after their rooftop confrontation, fate, or perhaps corporate irony, forced them back into the same orbit. A key project at Grant Industries had stalled, the Urban Renewal Initiative, a public-private partnership Lucas himself had championed. The head of community outreach had resigned suddenly, leaving a gap only someone who understood both corporate polish and real-world struggle could fill. The board, pressed for time, appointed Elena to assist Lucas directly. She accepted the assignment without expression. "It's just work," she said. But deep down, she knew this was her only chance to prove herself on her own terms, beyond whispers and pity. Their days became long, quiet marathons of planning sessions and neighborhood visits. They sat side by side in meetings, their exchanges clipped, professional yet strangely charged. She challenged him when he glossed over the human cost behind budget lines. He listened, reluctantly at first, then intently. One afternoon, they toured a worn-down housing project in the Bronx, where the scent of rain and rust hung in the air. Kids played barefoot near broken fences. Elena knelt beside a little girl, drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk. "Do you think they'll fix our building?" the child asked. Elena smiled gently. "Someone will, I promise." When she stood, Lucas was watching her, not like a billionaire studying an employee, but like a man seeing a world he'd never truly noticed before. That night, over takeout boxes in the office, their conversation shifted. He asked about her mother. She asked why he never talks about his father. The walls between them began to soften, not in romance, but in recognition. For the first time, Lucas realized Elena wasn't the girl at the center of a scandal. She was the conscience his world had forgotten it needed. It happened late one evening, long after the office lights had dimmed. Papers covered the table, budget drafts, community maps, and coffee cups gone cold. Elena was reviewing figures when her phone buzzed. A single message appeared. "Test results are ready." Her breath hitched. Lucas looked up immediately. "Go ahead," he said, though his tone betrayed his tension. She opened the email. Her eyes scanned the lines, then froze. A long, shaky breath escaped her lips. "It's negative," she whispered. "You're not the father." Lucas leaned back, exhaling deeply. Relief and confusion tangled in his expression. "Then whose?" Elena cut him off softly. "No one's. The baby isn't mine." He stared at her, stunned. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph, a young woman holding a newborn wrapped in a faded hospital blanket. "My sister, Marisol," she said quietly. "She passed away 6 months ago. I've been taking care of her son since then. I told the hospital he was mine because I didn't want him to go into the system. I thought I could protect him." Lucas sat in silence, the truth sinking in. Every rumor, every accusation, all built on a misunderstanding born of sacrifice. Finally, he said, "You carried that burden alone?" Elena nodded. "I didn't think anyone would believe me. People don't listen to Maid's daughters. They just decide what fits their story." Something shifted in his eyes, a crack in the armor of privilege. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "And maybe about more than that." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you, Mr. Grant. Power isn't the problem. It's forgetting who it's supposed to serve. For the first time, they understood each other completely. The invisible engine and the gilded cage finally meeting at the same truth. The truth arrived quietly, but its echo reached every corner of Grant Industries. A week later, the company held a press conference to address the unfortunate rumors surrounding the Urban Renewal Initiative. Rows of reporters filled the marble atrium. Cameras flashed as Lucas stepped up to the podium, calm, composed, but with a fire that wasn't there before. Margaret Grant stood beside him, unreadable. Elena remained at the back of the room, unnoticed by most. "Before we discuss business," Lucas began, "I need to correct something personal." The room stilled. Even Margaret's fingers tightened on the podium's edge. Over the past month, an employee of this company, Ms. Elena Ramirez, was subjected to gossip and humiliation that should never have happened within an institution claiming integrity. The rumors were false. He paused. Completely false. A ripple moved through the crowd. Lucas continued, voice steady. "The child in question belongs to her late sister. Ms. Ramirez acted out of love and responsibility, not deception. And I owe her a public apology for doubting her when she showed more character than most of us combined." Gasps and murmurs swept the hall. Margaret's lips tightened, but even she couldn't stop the applause that began to rise. Tentative at first, then certain. Elena's eyes stung. For the first time, she saw not pity or judgment, but respect. Lucas looked toward her then, meeting her gaze across the crowd. "This company was built on legacy," he said, "but it will move forward on truth." He stepped back from the podium. The hierarchy that had always kept her beneath him, even in silence, had quietly shifted, and in that moment the billionaire stood accountable to the maid's daughter. Weeks later, Elena found herself back where it all began, in the quiet hospital corridor. The same sterile walls, the same hum of machines, but this time there was no fear in her chest, only peace. In her hands she held a tiny silver rattle, tarnished at the edges, bought for $10 from a second-hand shop. It wasn't much, but it had been the first thing she'd ever bought for her nephew, Matteo. To her, it symbolized everything she had fought for, a future that didn't depend on wealth, only love. As she rocked the baby gently, Lucas appeared at the doorway. "No suit today, no entourage. Just a quiet nod. I set up a trust in Marisol's name," he said softly. "For Matteo, it's not charity, it's acknowledgement." Elena's eyes glistened. "You didn't have to." "I did," he replied. "You reminded me what real legacy means." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, two people from opposite worlds. Bound not by scandal, but by truth, Elena smiled faintly. Glancing at the rattle in her hand, "This baby isn't yours," she said again, but this time her tone was warm, almost forgiving. "And that," she added, "is exactly how it should be." Some stories don't end with grand gestures or perfect justice. They end with quiet truth. Elena Ramirez didn't win fame or fortune. She won something harder, her dignity. She stood against power and walked away unbroken. And Lucas Grant, a man born into everything, learned that not all debts are paid in money. Some are repaid in understanding. The world still whispered, as it always does, but for once it whispered with respect. And if you're still here, maybe this story reminded you of something. The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, and kindness doesn't need wealth to matter. So if this story made you feel something, share it. Because somewhere, someone is still standing in their own quiet hallway, holding on to their dignity, waiting for the world to finally see them too.